doing?
Good, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. My name is Paul. I will be counting you down. And why don't we go ahead and have you slate and begin, please?
Great. Jermaine Lucier with IO9 Gizmodo. Gareth, good afternoon, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing great, man. So, news broke that you taken this job like 16 months ago, and now the movie is here. Like, I know the producers had kind of planned on this being kind of a roller coaster to theaters, but were you worried at all about the accelerated timeline on something of this scale? Usually, I feel like it would have been much longer.
Yeah, normally you get from the first phone call till like the movie comes out is typically like 2.5 years for a big film like this. And I knew basically the July 4th weekend is what they were gunning for, and I thought, oh, that's just something they say, and then, they'll push it. And on the first meeting, I put my hand up, and they're like, Gareth at the back. And I'm like, yeah, can we push the release date? And they're like, no, next question. And so it was just we just weren't allowed to. We weren't even allowed to consider it. And my editor, Jabez, he put a quote on the front door of the edit suite, and it was from Leonard Bernstein, and it just said, art is when you have a plan and not quite enough time. And it felt like a weird thing was happening where you couldn't second guess yourself, and nor could anyone else. You had to go with your first instincts every time. And essentially, like when we did the director's cut and we screened that at Universal, you look at the timeline ahead of us, and it was like, we've only got like 2 weeks to do notes, you know what I mean? So like, there's not much anyone can really say. And they did give us this feedback, and we did it, and everyone was happy. And that was kind of the movie, It was such a weirdly straightforward process. And I think the reason for that is because it began with the screenplay that David Koepp, who wrote the original Jurassic Park, had written. Yeah. And everybody was pointing at that going, go make that, that's what we want. And so it was just quite a relatively smooth ride, to be honest.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know you're a huge Spielberg fan. You got to work with him here on this. And the film itself, having seen it now, it's a pretty great Spielberg homage, not just Jurassic, but Jaws and Indy. Like, was that made obvious in David's script, or was that you kind of adding those flourishes, or a combination of both?
I think there was definitely, like, in reading the script, there's like scenes, descriptions where, they're in a boat chasing a giant creature through the water. Right. They're leaning forwards at the front with a rifle. There's a giant fin, and you're like, this reminds me of another movie. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this thing called Jaws, and so you've kind of got that given, to start with, and then you've obviously got Jurassic, and so then I started to play this game of like, well, I guess then it's like open season a little bit, and why not have a bit of Raiders in there? You know what I mean? And so to me, I justified it in my mind because it felt semi-sacrilegious. I felt like I justified it by going, this is my big love letter to Steven Spielberg, you know what I mean? And so whenever there was a little of a vacuum or a little idea that was added, I always felt like, what's the Spielbergian, And I would never, ever, ever compare myself. He's the master, you know what I mean? But that was it was kind of it's like how I got through this was, because it was such an intimidating thing, knowing that, those masterpieces, like you're in the shadow of those films. My way through it was to just like consider this, a sort of love letter full of Easter eggs for other fans of his films. I don't know.
Saw plenty of those. So great. You said in a few other interviews, and it kind of feels obvious once you say it, that a lot of your other movies were kind of your calling card to make a Jurassic movie. Godzilla being a pretty obvious one. What did those films and others teach you to make this experience run a little smoother, make you feel a little more confident to jump into it?
Weirdly, you sort of learn that it you get to the end, and it won't kill you, and so don't worry about it. So I kind of wasn't worried. I think there were certain aspects of this film where I just wasn't worried about it at all, and it didn't really faze me. The bit that fazed me was just knowing that Steven Spielberg was watching the dailies. So as we were shooting the movie, he's watching all that material, and it's really intimidating as a filmmaker. You're kind of like, it's like writing a song for Paul McCartney or something. And so, yeah, it was. And I think there's a strange thing. It happened on Star Wars. It happened on this movie as well, which is when you're a little kid and you grow up playing with dinosaurs, you know, and spaceships, and then you learn that the world is not really built that way and it's all a lie called cinema. You end up quite disappointed and driving to work doing tax returns and a bit frustrated that they lied to you. And then one day you're really lucky and you end up in the middle of a jungle with dinosaurs, and you're like finally, you know, what they promised, you know, in the first place. And so it feels very comforting. Like it feels like becoming a child again, and strangely like having a comfort blanket. So it sort of compensates for any like anxiety you might have about doing a giant movie. Is it suddenly like this world that you just feel familiar with as a kid, you know?
Yeah, you've been prepping for it for your whole life, even when you didn't realize it.
Exactly, yeah.
One of the most important parts of a Jurassic movie is obviously the score. Alexander Desplat, great. And you guys use the Williams themes a lot more liberally than the last couple of movies. And I wanted to know, what are your conversations like with him about, okay, when can we use it? When is it too much? Is this too much? Tell me a little bit about through that give and take.
Yeah, it felt like, imagine, I don't know, it felt like, okay, you play the game where you go, okay, do we not do it at all, right? And then, we tried a version of that. We tried a version where we took it out completely, and it just didn't feel right. As a fan, it felt some magic was missing. And so then it was like, okay, we play it once. Where are we putting it? And that was the problem for me, because I wanted it to, the end credits to have the theme. Yeah. And so I was like, I want the end credits to be like the way the end credits were in Jurassic. And then you go, but then we're not really playing it in the movie, which is a shame. So we're going, okay, let's play it twice. And so it ended up in these two places. Yeah. But then there's obviously two themes. Da, 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 and then there's like da, 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 da. And so I felt like, okay, we get another token then, so we can play that one somewhere else. And so they're all in very strategic moments. There's little hints of them that Alexander did himself over some certain character moments where it just slightly goes to hint at it and goes away. But yeah, it was really Alexander, and the whole reason he wanted to be a composer was because of John Williams. So yeah, we basically would always have competitions about who's got the most pressure, because he was having to compete with John Williams, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm having to compete with Steven Spielberg, so get over it. It was. No,
I get it. As a fan of the franchise, in terms of overall story, what was the most exciting thing about kind of jumping into this world after the first 6 movies and sort of in this world where dinosaurs are kind of passé to most people?
Yeah, my first movie was a monster movie set in Central America and all that. And the way I sold it to everyone back then was it begins where all other monster movies end. And it was supposed to be like, you know, like the end of King Kong, where King Kong falls onto the middle of New York and dies. And it always feels like, and that's the end credits of King Kong. You go, well, imagine a movie where they're now trying to tidy that up and clean it up. And how do you move King Kong out the way for traffic, you know?
Right, yeah.
And it was funny, I've always enjoyed that as a starting point. Someone else's end is asked as a start for someone else. And then I started reading the script, and I was like, oh, this is like that kind of film I really enjoy, which is dealing with, you know, the ending of another movie. And also, it was a bit like the elephant in the room, or the T-Rex in the room as a filmmaker, is there's been a lot of these films now, and where do you go from here? And the fact is, like in the first page, it acknowledged it and said, you know, that they're all dying out, the world doesn't care anymore, dinosaurs are blasé. I thought, oh, okay, this is very honest and acknowledging the problem. And so now it was like, okay, well, it feels like a reset. And we just, you know, it was interesting where you could go from there. It felt like a chance to like start a fresh chapter.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely that, but I think what's interesting is that the world in the movies like that, but our world isn't exactly like that. You're making the 7th movie, but the box office proves that people still want to see these. But like, but was there any thought about like the parallel between like we're making a 7th movie in the franchise, that people have been kind of used to versus the world of the movie?
Yeah, well, I felt like, like you're always looking, as a sci-fi storyteller, you're always looking for what's the hidden metaphor for whatever the crazy sci-fi element is, right? Because for these films are never really about spaceships, robots, or dinosaurs. They feel pointless if they are. They have meaning when the whole thing's a kind of, analogy for something else. And so I kind of went through this a bit going, what is this really about? Like, what's this story really about? Like, as a mythical thing that you keep in your pocket. And it felt to me like the dinosaurs were kind of like films. And the idea of people sort of slowly, not going to the cinema, you know what I mean? And that they started trying different things to make them more entertaining. That they mutated them, they created this stuff that people can't watch, or look at. And I kind of felt like this, in a weird way, I was getting a kick out of, it was some strange version of like the situation we're in as filmmakers where, like, how do you get people excited about this stuff again? And then it got interesting for me, when you can find the meat on the bone, it was, of the science fiction of it all.
Yeah, that's really cool. I recently, just in preparation for this, rewatched the extended cut of Dominion, and you realize that Colin Trevorrow had to make some really brutal choices for the theatrical version of the movie. He clearly had a little more time. Did you face any kind of Sophie's choices in the edit here where, you really had struggled? I know you said, like, again, you didn't have as much time, so you kind of had to be a little more definitive.
Yeah, there was the thing that got cut out. There's very little that got cut out. The director's cut, if you want to call it that, which we screened around Christmas, just after I was determined to do a film that was under 2 hours, and so we showed this 1 hour 59 cut to the studio, and essentially their note was like, "Great, could you put the 5 minutes that you cut out back in?" And so we put those 5 minutes back in, and it was essentially the movie, and so then when you get tapped on the shoulder for the bonus extras on iTunes and stuff. Right. They were like, "Have you got any deleted scenes?" It was like, "Well, not really." And there's two things on the deleted scenes, actually three now. One of them I really wanted to stay in the movie. I really liked it, and that was kill your baby sort of moment. I won't ruin it for people, but there's a section out the front of the gas station that used to be a little bit more like being hunted, like the tension of something coming. And it was a note from David Koepp, which was essentially the third act. If you give it a name, it would be Run Like Hell. And so basically, once they started running, it was like, don't make them stop. You know what I mean? And it felt like it stopped again. And so we removed that idea, those beats, and it got a lot better. But I do really like what happened in the bit where they did stop, and that'll be on the extras.
Cool. And this might be my last thing, and it's a spoiler, so I'll hold it till after. But I'm curious. Clearly, watching the movie, we're supposed to think that Kincaid dies. We don't see him die, so I was like, "Ooh, is that a sequel?" And he comes back. Did he ever make that ultimate sacrifice at some point, or was he always going to survive there?
No, yeah. So there was a draft where he died, and then as we pursued Mahershala, I think they felt like, well, this is a big deal actor. We would want him to hang around. So then it got changed to him living, and then when I spoke to Mahershala, he actually brought up himself like, I think he should die. And I was like, and then I saw an opportunity and I went, I totally agree, right? So then me and him sort of fought for that, and we got our way, and he ended up dying in the script. So it flipped back to him dying. And then Universal, in their wisdom, kind of said, look, we haven't got time for a pickup shoot or any reshoots or anything like this. Just get something whilst you're out in Thailand that can cover for the fact that if he lived, right? Just do it. Sure. And I was thinking, I know how this works. If I shoot something, it's going to end up in the movie. And so then I was like, I've got to think of the really good version of him living and how that would work. And I tried to picture this something, and then I started to fall in love with it and go, actually, I quite like that. And then we shot it, and I really liked everyone's performance in it. And And I think why it works, if it does, and I wasn't expecting this at all, but because everything is happening and has been put in there because we thought he would die. So even like the final farewells and things like this, you go, they only do this in movies when someone's going to die, right? And we kept them all in. I think the audience subconsciously has learned he's a goner. And then when he comes back, it's actually surprising. And then this is the first time watched it with an American audience the other night at the premiere, and it was my favourite reaction in the whole film was when that flare went up behind Scarlett. It was this big cheer and clap, and they already knew what was about to happen.
Yeah.
And it was really lovely. I kind of nearly teared up. It was, I felt like, okay, I'm happy to be wrong there. I'm glad the studio told us to shoot that little extra piece.
And now, if the second one happens, you have a 2-time Oscar winner ready to. Gareth, thank you so much for the time today, man. I think the movie's really fun and great, and you're going to do really great with it. And I can't wait to talk to you on the next one.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. As in, talk to you, not that I think it's great.
Right, it is. It is.
Cheers. Thank you. Thanks.
Recording stopped.